We've been using various APIs such as the Metadata API to work with the database up until now. By using these APIs, we've avoided directly querying the database. However, we're coming to the point where we can't justify using APIs for certain tasks. We need full control over the database, and in these next few lectures, you'll see how to do just that. One of the benefits of using APIs is that we didn't have to create tables or insert data. While these APIs are useful, they don't provide us with everything we need. Sometimes you will have to create complex custom queries. Other times you'll have to create tables. In this lecture, we're going to create a database table. This table will contain ratings for our recipes. First, we're going to create it through an interface and then learn how to create it with code. I'm using HeidiSQL for this. It's a really great program for communicating with SQL databases. If you're comfortable with PHPMyAdmin, then by all means, go ahead and use it. If this is your first time using HeidiSQL, then I'll show you how to connect to your database quickly. For the hostname/IP, it should be 127.0.0.1. The username should be root and the password should be empty. The rest of the settings are just fine as is. Next, you should just click Open and you should see all your databases. Go to the database that contains your WordPress installation. You should see about 11 tables. You may see more because plugins can and are allowed to create more database tables. Before we create our own table, let's check out how WordPress creates tables. Open the WP_posts tables. WordPress's database design is very good. WordPress tries its best to implement the best database practices, and it shows here. One thing you'll notice is that for their IDs is that they use the big integer type to allow for scaling in large amounts of data. It's always good practice to follow how WordPress designs their database. This way, you can remove any confusion if someone else takes a look at your own custom tables. You'll also notice that every table starts with WP_. This is very important to note down. The goal right now is to create a table with HeidiSQL's help, and you'll see why in a second. To create a table, you'll have to click the database and select Create New Table. From here, we can begin defining the table. I'm going to call the table WP_recipe_ratings, and it should have 4 columns. I'm going to pre-fill these and then go over what you should set. Pause the video for a second and fill out the form just as I did. We have 4 fields named ID, Recipe ID, Rating, and User IP. The ID will be unique, and we'll be setting it as our primary key. To create a primary key, you just right-click and select Create New Index Primary. The type should be Big Int. We use Big Int as this is what WordPress uses for their own IDs. The length should be 20 with auto increment as the default. The recipe ID will contain the ID of the post. This will also be the type Big Int with a length of 20. The rating will contain the user rating along with their user IP. Let's create our table now, and you should receive no errors so far. Great. The reason I had you create this table through HeidiSQL is because Heidi will generate the query for us in 2 locations. If you look at the bottom, you'll notice all these SQL queries being executed. It even has the create query. However, it's all compressed into this one line. There's actually a more cleaner and formatted version which is available under this Create Code tab. Copy this and make sure you have it in hand when we create this table via code. I want to create this through our plugin and not through HeidiSQL. Let's open the activation file and get started. The first thing I want to do is include the global variable WPDB. This variable contains an object with methods and properties for interacting with the database. This object is created by WordPress for you and is already connected to the database. I'm going to create a variable named createSQL, and this will contain a string with our SQL. Let's copy and paste the query from HeidiSQL into this string like so. I'm going to format this a bit by indenting some stuff just to make it look a little bit cleaner and readable. We need to modify this query a bit to be compatible and consistent with our database. First is the prefix. Not all installations of WordPress will be prefixed with WP underscore. So I want you to remove this bit, and instead we're going to append a dynamic prefix. The WPDB object contains a property named prefix, and this property simply contains the prefix of the current WordPress installation. Next up is making the charset dynamic. The WPDB object has a method called getCharsetCollate. As it sounds, this will get the collation of the currently installed database. I'm going to modify this end of the query a little bit. We don't have to make any further modifications to our SQL query. All we have to do now is execute it. You may be thinking that there's a method in the WPDB object for doing this, but there isn't. Strangely enough, WordPress doesn't include a createTable method. Instead, we have to use a different function. I'm going to require a file called /wp-admin/includes/upgrade.php. I also appended this to a constant named absPath. This constant is created by WordPress and points to the root installation of our WordPress site. We have to include this file so we can use a function called dbdelta. This file usually isn't loaded, so we have to load it. The dbdelta function is used for executing queries that modify the database. In the resource section, I provide a link to this function. If you take a look at the source code, you'll find all this code that will assist us with creating a database. Here is what WordPress has to say about this function. Useful for creating new tables and updating existing tables to a new structure. I'm going to pass this function for our query. That's it. We're done. I'm going to go back to HeidiSQL and I'm going to drop the newly created table. Dropping a table is just another way of saying deleting it. Back inside WordPress, let's deactivate our plugin and then reactivate it. You should not get any errors. Go back to HeidiSQL and refresh the database. You should see the recipe ratings table pop up again. I know this can seem a bit confusing, but working with the database is actually easier than this. 95% of the time, you won't have to worry about requiring certain files. Creating, updating, and deleting tables requires the upgrade file. The reason this file is required is because of security reasons. It's not normal to load functions specifically made for updating, creating, and deleting tables on every page request. If this function was loaded everywhere, then it would cause some serious security issues for web developers and owners. WordPress provides a lot of methods for executing queries and takes care of sanitizing your queries for you. So I promise, creating a query like this is a one-time thing. If you're interested in learning more about this process, then I provide a link to a WordPress developer page that provides details about this.